Well, the premise of being woke, right, was originally that you would raise awareness for social and racial injustice. I agree with that. By that criteria, I'm woke. That is not what woke became. Woke became a form of censorious virtue signaling fascism. And what we're seeing now is the very rapid, actually, disintegration of wokeism because people have woken up to it. And what I hope is that people like the people of Los Angeles who've seen their city getting ravaged by this crap, wake up, smell the cappuccino, and vote according to reality and not to what they think they should be doing based on things like...
Forget about climate change, forget about unchecked capitalism.
No. All those things are important.
Because they'll burn your city
Let me bring
down.
in Jillian, who's been shaking her head. Jillian?
Well, here's the reason I think, in particular, people are targeting this issue. There are two quantifiable moments that are pretty outrageous. So the first one is, I believe it was Kristen Larson who said, hey, you're worried about me pulling your husband out of a fire. Well, then he got himself in the wrong place. She should have been swiftly fired for that statement.
Yeah.
Regardless of her color or her gender, that was an outrageous thing to say. I don't care if she was a white man. If a white man said something like, well, your wife got herself into the wrong place, we would all be outraged. She should have been fired. And now we have to ask ourselves why she wasn't fired. And then the next thing is the lady, I think her name is Janice Quinones, who was in charge of making sure that reservoir on the Palisades was full, was caught in an interview saying that her top priority was DEI.
Yeah.
Legitimately verbatim a quote. And I think that is exactly what Piers is talking about. I can't speak to Karen Bass or how qualified she was or she wasn't because I'm no longer a California resident, so I didn't vote for her. I didn't do my homework on her. And I do agree that regardless of DEI, she's doing a crap job, and regardless of Republican or Democrat, Newsom sucks. He is the worst, and he has been the worst forever since 2018, when he got the job in 2019, and how he's run the state since then. He sucks. But there are two very clear examples of what Piers is speaking about.
Yeah. Amala, I want to play a clip of Gavin Newsom, who keeps smirking. I just don't understand why he keeps smirking. Let's take a look.
We're in this emergency environment and everything else. So I just want to determine the facts, but no one has any patience anymore. In this weaponized, back to the grievance of Trump, everyone else, there's immediacy, and lies travel the proverbial world, and it's hard to get the facts out there unless you have the backing of those facts and you can communicate them soberly. And so that's what we're trying to achieve as relates to this. But I have 10 other things we're doing concurrently as well. I mean, across the board on recovery, on disaster assistance, getting the major disaster declaration. It may be the first one in U.S. history over a text with the White House within literally 36 hours.
And every appearance he's made, Amala, he can't stop this little supercilious smug smirk. So what are you being smug about?
Right. Yeah, I'm not sure what's actually going on there. And I have seen him smirking in other interviews where he's talking about reimagining LA and the plan that he already has for the city. So we'll see what that actually looks like. And quickly, to the point of DEI, for Marc and Michael, we don't have to call them DEI hires. They call themselves DEI hires. When we got this fire chief rolled out, she wasn't rolled out as a woman with 22 years experience as a firefighter and an engineer. She was rolled out as a woman who's lesbian. The very same for the assistant fire chief who says she won't pull a man out of a fire. The very same for Quinones, who Jillian was just speaking about. We don't have to call them diversity, equity, and inclusion hires. They will do that themselves.
Yeah, and I think, Amala, the point I was trying to make to Marc, where I'm not quite sure he grasped what I was getting at, is that large swathes of the electorate in LA, I think, have been contaminated by this woke virus. And they start to think that DEI has to be the be-all and end-all of everything. And they start to vote accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are seeing a culture that's been created in this city where we're pushing forward these initiatives. If I took 1,000 California residents and I showed them a photo of a white man and a black woman with giving them no qualifications, no idea about their education, and no idea about the job that they'd be going into, they would pick the black woman. Let's be honest about where the culture has been set in this city and look around to see that the city is also on fire.
Okay, let me bring Michael.
Can I just say one?
Yeah.
It just might be worth knowing that for the last 3 decades, there have literally been hundreds of scientific studies that have done the very thing you're talking about, usually through resumes. And what the evidence shows, what the scientific data from conservatives, Republicans, black, white, independent, political, apolitical, whatever, have all said the exact opposite of what you said. There has literally not been one empirical study in which the person has chosen a black person over a white person systematically. Also, when the names are blocked and
you don't think a single person, hang on, you don't think a single person in Los Angeles has ever voted for somebody based on skin color? Are you being funny?
That is a Bikram yoga stretch. There's nothing of what I just said is what you just said.
Yeah, you did.
I was talking about employer hiring, and you just flipped it and made it seem as if I said no one in LA has ever voted on the basis of race. Everybody votes on the basis of race, or not literally everybody. Every country, every state,
so you
every
agree
city
with
has
me then?
People who vote on the basis of race. I guarantee you, old white men in Mississippi voted on the basis of race, and I don't think they voted for Kamala. Black men in New York or black women in New York voted for president on the basis of race, and they didn't vote for Trump. People vote on the basis of race all the time.
So you say okay.
That is not my point.
Okay.
The point is that
So you accept that Karen Bass could have got a lot of votes based on her skin color? So you accept my premise that Karen Bass in Los Angeles could have got a lot of votes from people based on her skin color because they bought into the whole DEI argument?
No, that's not what I just said.
It is.
I said that everybody does it. The difference is
so you
only seem to think that black people... No, let me finish the sentence. Let me finish the sentence so we're clear. You seem to only think that black people voting on the basis of race or brown people voting on the basis of race...
No,
I'm saying
I
black,
said she
white,
got
red, yellow,
her job,
Democrat,
in my
Republican,
opinion.
They all...
No. I'm saying
you have no evidence for your opinion.
You just said everybody votes according to
it.
race, which is also bullshit, by the way. They don't all vote according to race. But the
That's
point...
But you've actually, without realizing not literally everybody, but
Mark,
people across
hang on. Without realizing it, you've confirmed my thesis, right? Because you've basically agreed that there are large numbers of people in Los Angeles who probably voted for Karen Bass because of her skin color. And now she's turned out to be useless.
I want you to hear. I want you to try to attempt to hear what I'm saying. First, I want you to allow for the possibility that I could completely comprehend what you're saying and just disagree. And second, I want you to allow for the possibility that
I'll allow for that possibility.
That you may see this differently. Thank you. This is what I'm saying. Your premise is Karen Bass was elected partially, at least, because the people who voted for her on the basis of race. And you're saying that I have affirmed that thesis through my statement. What I'm saying as my rejoinder is, no, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is both candidates and all candidates get votes on the basis of race. A billionaire white man also gets votes on the basis of race. And I am not suggesting, and contrary to what you just suggested, that that the number of votes for her by virtue of race are any more than the votes for him by virtue of race. I never said that, and I don't believe that. So at least, even if you disagree with me, you can at least acknowledge on national television that I did not affirm your thesis. If you comprehend, I didn't affirm your thesis.
I think we're edging towards a greater comprehension of each other's positions, because the point I'm making is that I
always comprehend it.
Okay, but the point I'm making is that DEI has become such a massive thing in somewhere like LA that inevitably it's spilled over to the electorate when they vote for elected officials. And I think that's what happened with Karen Bass, who has now exposed herself to the world as being utterly useless. That's my point. Let me bring Michael back in. On Gavin Newsom, look, he's a slick operator, no question. He's the kind of guy that if you were building a politician, he'd look and sound like Gavin Newsom, or Barack Obama. They look the part, they sound the part, they're articulate, whatever. I think he's getting found out here. I think there's a supercilious smuggery about him, and particularly when he was asked about Trump going after him about reservoirs, and he started saying, there's nothing wrong with any of the reservoirs. And they said, well, literally one of the biggest reservoirs, the biggest near Pacific Palisades, was not working. Let's take a look at that.
The reservoirs are completely full, the state reservoirs here in Southern California. That mis and disinformation, I don't think advantages or aids any of us. Responding to Donald Trump's insults, we would spend another month. I'm very familiar with them. Every elected official that he disagrees with, very familiar with them.
We do know, though, from reporting here locally that one reservoir that serves the Palisades was not full.
And that's exactly what triggered my desire to get the investigation, to understand what was happening with that local reservoir. That was not a state system reservoir, which the president-elect was referring to as it relates to the Delta and somehow connecting the Delta smelt to this fire, which is inexcusable because it's inaccurate, also incomprehensible to anyone that understands water policy in the state.
Now, he was squirming and tap dancing around there, Michael, but I mean, to me, he got caught out.
Yeah, I think he did get called out there because one of the reservoirs was empty and it shouldn't have been empty, and it was empty because it fixed to the cover that should have taken a week ended up taking more than a year and costing way too much. And this is an issue with, I think, the way that we spend money and the way that we manage projects in the state, and that needs to get fixed. But I'm glad that's the focus, because there's so many other things being brought into this conversation that I think are distractions. I think, the fact we're debating whether Karen Bass got elected because she's a black woman is frustrating. I think Gavin Newsom is reasonably frustrated about the smelt and the way that Donald Trump tried to blame the water shortage in California on this like endangered species, which is not correct. I think that what we should be talking about is, why wasn't the reservoir full? Reservoir full. Thank you. That's hard to say. Why weren't we ready for this fire? And how do we hold our government officials accountable, regardless of their race, regardless of their gender? I don't care, right? Like how do we get better at this? And I think that is a question that we really ought to be talking more about. And I appreciate Jillian for bringing up at the beginning of this conversation the fact that we should be doing controlled burns, the fact that we should be doing brush clearance, the fact that we should be hardening our structures so that wildfires don't spread so quickly in this city, where wildfires are endemic and they are going to happen again.
But here's the point I'd make to you, Michael. Here's the point I'd make back, is that I don't think you can divorce the two things. I don't think you can divorce the politicking that's gone on in the election of certain officials and the incompetence we now see laid bare. You can't divorce that from that, because ultimately these decisions get taken by elected officials. It's all interwoven. You need very, very good people to run a city like Los Angeles. You don't need someone like Karen Bass, in my opinion, as an Angelino half the time.
Well, Gavin Newsom is white and privileged as it gets. He certainly wasn't a DEI hire, and he's the tip of the spear here. And he is responsible for so much of this catastrophe. I could point to specific bills in California that passed the entire state's legislature to manage forestry that he personally vetoed and said, well, I'm worried about the ongoing cost. Well, how much is this going to cost to fix the state? You're going to pass it on to the taxpayers across the country? I mean, we know for a fact that fire breaks work, and I'll give you a perfect example, because the fire stopped in northern Malibu where it had already burned. That's why you do controlled burns. We know that it works. It just worked in these conditions where it already burned. And there are so many different issues with how water is mismanaged. Why haven't we built any of those new reservoirs that were commissioned in 2014 under Proposition 1? Not one of those reservoirs is complete. And you can point to all of this red tape, but now he says, I'm going to cut through all of this red tape and make sure all this stuff gets done. Well, why haven't you previously? This is not this guy's first rodeo. We have a fire every single year. And the one where I lost my home in 2018 was catastrophic. And let me say one more thing about that, just to really shine a light on this guy's negligence. PG&E was responsible for that fire. This is a privately owned utility company that had equipment on power lines that was 100 years old. They donated to his gubernatorial campaign in 2018. When he was elected in 2019, he facilitated their ability to walk away scot-free. I cannot tell you how many people died, how many people lost their homes. No infrastructure has been updated. I could go on and on and on about this guy, and he isn't a DEI hire. So I can kind of play both sides of this argument. And this is where I kind of defer back to, let's look at what the hell needs to change, period.
Yeah, I mean, Amala, there's a clip of Donald Trump appearing with Newsom from 2018 in a California forest. Let's take a look at this.
President of Finland, and he said, we have a much different, we're a forest nation. He called it a forest nation. And they spend a lot of time on raking and cleaning and doing things, and they don't have any problem. And when it is, it's a very small problem. So I know everybody's looking at that, to that end, and it's going to work out.
I mean, he was right, wasn't he, Amala?
Yeah, it seems like Donald Trump has been right on several occasions in looking at California and specifically Los Angeles and sort of predicting what was going to happen here. And what's devastating is that we can find so much evidence of people predicting this exact thing taking place, and yet it seems as though nothing was done. I got the opportunity to go into the Palisades to see what has happened on the other end of these fires. It is absolutely devastating.
Yeah.
But what's important is that our communities have really come together. I mean, first responders, shout out to every single one of you that has shown up to fight these fires, and the community members, the people who are living in these houses, who stayed to fight and to keep their property and to help others around them. It seems as though our regular citizens and our first responders, people who we would consider lower on the rungs of leadership, have really done better than anybody else in this city. And yeah, as we saw, the fact that we could have seen this coming and we knew exactly what to do to prevent the devastation that we've seen is just harrowing.
Yeah. Marc, a couple of issues, obviously, which are slightly detached from this, but are going to come into play. One is the talk about things like the Oscars, the Olympics in LA and so on. Huge events where LA would be the center of global attention. Some people thinking the Oscars should be put off now, that maybe the Olympics might be jarring with people spending all that money on a huge event like that. I've got to say, I don't agree with that. I think that actually it's a great chance for LA to show its back on its feet and do what they do best. But what do you think?
I think the Olympics is such a big haul. It's so lucrative. It's such a big stage. It's such a big spectacle, and it's so unwieldy. I can't imagine relocating it easily. And I think, to your point, if it certainly helps a narrative and from a state branding, even national branding perspective, it makes a lot of sense for them. The Oscars, you know, I could live with seeing the Oscars in New York. I could live with seeing the Oscars somewhere else once or twice in terms of for the rebuilding of it all. We certainly had to make adjustments during COVID in that way. So I think that's a far more likely switch and a far more manageable switch. But at the end of the day, the last thing I just wanted to say was, again, I think the powerful, the people who benefit the most from environmental abuse, from the negligence that we've seen from the top down, all the people who benefit from us continue to drill, baby drill, as the incoming president is saying, and as we continue to cook the earth, all of these people want us pointing our fingers at each other. They want us focusing on who's what color, who's this, who's that. Because as long as we're distracted by the identity politics, they can continue to exploit us, extract from the land, and make money hand over fist while the vulnerable get more and more precarious.
Interesting point. Michael, I want to end on just with climate change quickly, because a lot of debate about whether climate change has played a factor here. I mean, I only know that LA has gone through a lot of periods in its existence. We have very dry periods, then very wet periods, but almost uniquely, in the last 3 years, it had 2 very wet winters. And then this year, it was quite wet and then suddenly incredibly dry. And the theory is that this has led to a lot of extra vegetation, then getting very, very dry, and that acting like a gigantic reinforced tinderbox when this fire came with the Santa Anas. How much of that do you think is connected directly to climate change?
I think that's the direct result of climate change. What climate change does is it makes weather patterns more extreme. So I'm glad you mentioned last winter, because last winter we had an incredible amount of rain. It was actually, we had a hurricane last year. It was the first time I've ever seen a hurricane in LA, and I've been here my entire life. And then we had 8 months of drought. Following that a torrential downpour and a hurricane, we had 8 months of drought. So these extremities are being caused by a warming climate that is getting warmer. 2024 was the hottest year on record in human history. So there's no doubt that the drought and the hurricane were both the result of changing weather patterns due to climate change. And what that means is that the weather is getting more extreme, which means that the fact that we have a city in a wildfire zone is becoming a bigger and bigger problem.